Welcome! In this series of videos, we will look at software add-ons for both the PowerBasic Console and Windows compilers. Today we will continue to look at doing web development using the Abyss web server from Aprelium in conjunction with the PowerBasic Console compiler. At the end of the last video, we had installed and configured the Abyss web server on our computer. In this case, we have installed it on the Quad 003 computer, which is a separate computer from which we're going to be doing our PowerBasic programming. You can of course install the web server on the same computer that you do your PowerBasic coding on. However, having the web server on a separate computer certainly emulates better what the user experience on a web server normally is. You would normally run your browser on one computer and expect the web server to be on a different machine. In this case, the machines are only 4 feet apart, but the principle is exactly the same whether they're 4 feet, 4 miles, or 4,000 miles apart. So having configured our web server, our task for today is to further configure it to allow us to run PowerBasic Console applications on the web server to return a web page to the user in their browser. So we have already created a website folder on the root of the C drive. And this at the moment contains a static index HTML page. Since we're going to be writing CGI applications in the PowerBasic Console compiler, we'll need a place on the web server to actually locate these binaries. So we're going to create a new folder within the website folder. And we're going to call this folder CGI bin, because it will contain the CGI binaries. And although we're not going to do it today, I'm going to create 2 additional folders. Because when you start doing web development, you'll find that you may well want to download some JavaScript libraries, and you will at some point want to use cascading style sheets. So I'm going to create 2 folders which in our future videos are going to contain these. So there are our 3 folders created inside our website folder. What we need to do now is we need to make a small configuration change to the Abyss web server to allow it to access these folders. I've set the browser up so it will default to go to the configuration page of the Abyss web server. Once we're inside the web server console, we need to click on the Configure button. In our last video, we spent most of the time inside the General widget. Today we're going to go inside the scripting parameters. There are a number of things we can do inside here, and what we're going to concentrate on is the script paths section. And we're going to add these 3 folders we just added. So we've added the CGI bin folder. We'll also add the JavaScript folder, and we'll additionally add the cascading style sheet folder. Now we've got all of those set up, the console has realized we've changed the configuration. We need to OK this and then restart the web server. So having restarted a web server, our configuration of the web server console is complete. Normally with a professional website, you would use a secured FTP client application to transfer your binaries from your own computer to the website. What we're going to do here is we're going to share the website folder on the Quad 003 machine so it can be accessed directly from our coding machine. So if we use the Windows key and the letter X, it will bring up a number of options. What we're after is computer management. All we're going to do here is we're going to share the website folder so that the other computers on the network can actually see it. So we're going to shared folders, shares, and we will right click and create a new share. And we will browse to the folder. There we go, website. And we'll click on next. The next screen allows you to set the permissions as to who can actually access this folder. It defaults to all users have read-only access. If this was a company intranet we were setting up, I would use the Customize permissions to give a select group of people access to updating these binaries. But since today we're just demonstrating this, we'll open the permissions up a little bit. We'll allow everyone full control. And there is our folder set up. So if we go out to our main computer, open up a file manager, and there is our website folder containing our files. So we can quite happily go in here from our main coding computer and drop the binaries in when they're ready. So now that we have fully configured our web server, it's time to go into the console compiler. So here we are inside the PowerBasic console compiler. I'm also going to include one additional include file, which is going to allow us to access CGI. This particular library does actually ship with PowerBasic. It's in the samples folder under Internet CGI. However, I've put this into our libraries folder just so we can access it easily. To the PB main function, I'm going to add to a new function called create web page. This web page creation function will create an HTML string and pass it back. This goes from our PowerBasic application to the web server and then back to the browser which called the web server in the first place. So in our new function, I've created a local variable called strhtml, and this is going to contain the HTML string we will pass back to the web server and subsequently to the browser. HTML is a mechanism by which you can actually define the areas of your web page and put values in them. You can create a very simple web page by only using a handful of tags. What we're doing here is we are creating an HTML tag to say this is the beginning of our HTML document. We're then using a body tag to say the body of the HTML document is about to follow. And then we're using an H2 tag to say we want to have a slightly larger font displayed. And then we're opening a paragraph tag to say this is the text we want to put onto the screen. And we're doing a very simple welcome to our CGI generated web page. And the tags with the slash before them are closing tags. We're closing down the paragraph tag, we're closing down the increased font size tag, we're then closing down the body tag and closing down the HTML page. So these simple 3 lines would define our entire web page. So having defined the web page, we now want to write this back to the web server. So we're going to use a write CGI function. This function exists within our PBCGI library. And this takes a single parameter, which in this case is the string that defines our web page. So if we save this and compile, this then gives us an executable. And here is our executable. Now this second window down here is our shared folder on the Quad 3 server which contains the website. We're just going to drag this exe down to here. That is how we deploy our application to the website. So now we need to look to see, can we actually call it? So we enter our URL, which is HTTP, the name of the server, in this case Quad 003, CGI bin, because this is where our application sits, and the actual name of the application. And when we hit return on that, we will get our message coming up. A very simple HTML page, merely giving us a piece of text on the screen. So this has proved we have actually written our first CGI application in PowerBasic with the console compiler. Now this is a very basic web page, and we're now going to improve on this. So if we go back to the console compiler, and we're now going to create a second function that's going to do something a little more. So the second function is still building up the string, but we're putting a variable in the middle, which in this case is $. So this should actually place the time into the string on the web page. So we will change our application, so it's calling this new function. We will recompile, and we'll try running that again. Copy the new exe down, replace the existing one, back to our website, and there is our new CGI deployed. Now, the advantage of running CGI applications on remote servers is that we can display information that the user wishes to see. So we're going to create a text file on our web server, which is going to contain some information we want displayed on the web page. So on the web server, I've created a data folder inside the CGI bin folder. And inside that data folder is a small text file which is comma separated. If we have a look at that, it's going to bring up a list of names, addresses, telephone numbers and account numbers. And we'll want this information returned on the web page. While this information is coming from a CSV file, it could be coming from anywhere. It could be coming from another system, it could be coming from a database. The principle is exactly the same. So if we have a look at our application again, we're going to create another function. We want to read a file and display this file in a formatted form on the web page. So since this is a CSV file and we want to display it on screen, we've got some ready-built functions that read CSV files into arrays. So we're going to add that library, the file handling routines library, to our application. Because this library contains a function we can make good use of. So firstly, we will need an array into which to read this information. And we'll call that array strwork. And we will need a file name to define which file to read. And we will set the value of that file name. So we can use the exe_path string constant to pull back the exe_path that this binary actually sits in. And we're appending to the end of that the data folder and the name of the file we wish to read, myfile.csv. So we're going to use the read the CSV file into array function, which takes two parameters. The first being the file name, which we have already defined, and the second being the array. And this array is where the information is going to end up. Now, if the file cannot be read into the array for any reason, then the function will return false. And if that's the case, we want to display something to the user to let them know that all is not well and the file could not be read. So down here, we're going to use the write CGI function to write an HTML document that merely says unable to read the data file. So having done the error handling, how do we actually get this array to display on the screen? Well, as we did before, we will need a string to contain the HTML. So we'll define that at the beginning, and we can start to build up our HTML. So we're going to start this with opening tags for the HTML and the body of the document. We're then going to put a title in, which is a slightly larger font, in a paragraph to say this is the output of our data table. And assuming we can actually read the CSV file into the array, we can start to append to the end of that string, the str_html. One thing you can do quite easily in HTML documents is use the table object. The table object is designed to hold information in a tabular format. So all we need to do is add the table object as the table tag to the end of our HTML. The function that pulled the CSV file into an array brings it into a multi-dimensional array, in this case a two-dimensional array. Each element of the array will contain one piece of information, and we want these to appear in a separate cell within our little table grid. So we're going to use a for next loop. And this for next loop will be for the rows and the columns within our array, and these are going to go into the table. So we'll need to declare two further variables to handle this. So we're going to use long R for the rows and long C for the columns. So in our for next loop, we're going from long R equals 0 to the upper bounding of the array. And since this is a multi-dimensional array, we're using the comma 1 to say this is the first dimension we want to work the upper bounding of. And each time we step through this loop, it will be the beginning of a new row in our table. So we need to use another tag to tell the browser that this is indeed another row. So we can use the tr tag to say this is a table row beginning. And then we can put our nested loop on the columns to handle each of the columns. And for that, we're using long C from column 1 to the upper bounding of the array on dimension number 2, which will tell us how many columns there actually are. So how do we put the information that's in the array into a specific column and row position within the table? Well, we're going to use another tag called TD, which in this case is the table data tag. And we're appending to the existing variable HTML, and we're using the array with the long R and long C pointing at the element within the array. And having put the data into that element, we can then use the closing tag to close off the data cell for that. And once we've got to the end of the columns, we can then tell the system that we want to close off the row. And we will then use the tr close tag. All tags with a slash at the beginning are a close tag, and all tags without a slash are an opening tag. So what we've done here is we've told the system that we're creating a table. For each of the rows, we've put a row start tag. For each of the cells within that row, we've put a TD start, the data, and then the TD close. And at the end of the row, we're using a tr close tag to close the row down. And once we get to the very last row, we then have to close off the table, and then we can close off the document. So we have a table close tag, an HTML close tag, and a body close tag. So the value of str_html is now the entire body of the document we want to pass back to the browser. And just as we did before, we will then use the write_cgi function to send that back. So we will now change the call in our PB main function to go to version 3 of our web page, which is the new one we have just created. We will compile that, and we will look to copy that onto our web server. And that's it copied down. So we go back to our browser and run our application again. We will see that the information is now appearing on the web page. It's not the most elegant or tidy web page, but at least the information is appearing. One of the options that you can use in the table object is you can set a border around the table. So if we amend the table tag to contain the border equals 1, and if we compile that, and we'll now copy our updated executable onto the web server, and we will run our program again. Each time a user actually accesses this particular website using this particular URL, an instance of the CGI demo1 executable will be instantiated and run on the server. So if 10 people at the one time all come on to access this, then there will be 10 instances of this application running at the same time. However, as the program doesn't run for very long, web servers can handle this kind of load quite easily. And when we run the program now, we will see that the table now has a border around every cell. And again, it's not the most elegant or pretty website, but it is returning the information that we want on the web page. And it's a place to begin. What we'll do in our next video is we will use a cascading style sheet to enhance the look of this web page. But that's it for today. Thank you for watching.